So I noticed for Ocean Gate Zen Center, the emblem or the image that you have, it to me, I can see waves, and then there's like three dots, and I think that are those stars?
No, they're the it's supposed to be Buddha Dharma Sangha.
Oh,
So
beautiful. Yeah.
a woman named Anna Mandiglia, who's a local artist who now actually lives, I think, up in Arcadia. She had done like this poster for some Capitola, maybe it was a begonia festival, and she had done these little cartouches that had these, waves in them. And so we knew Anna, and we said, well, would you, let us use one of those wave cartouches as a emblem for Ocean Gate as a kind of chop? And she said, yeah. And she kind of redesigned it. And we put the three dots in there for the Buddha Dharma and Sangha. So that's how we came up with that.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful, and it says so much about where it's based. Right in Capitola, right in that Santa Cruz kind of 10-minute walk from the beach area, and yet
Yeah.
it also, I mean, there's so much movement in it too, that of that image, and yet it's a still image, which is also really beautiful. And then I saw the space itself. Uh, it looks like a really beautiful room. I haven't been physically myself, but there's a beautiful altar space that has a calligraphy behind it. What is that, a calligraphy?
So the calligraphy is the Heart Sutra, which Jaku Kinst, who's my partner and wife, and also we co-teach and co-founders of Ocean Gate. So Jaku received this from a student who had gone to, I think maybe to China, I'm not sure, and had gotten this commissioned, this Heart Sutra to do. And the altar was designed by a guy named Jim Abrams, who is a Dharma brother of mine, who's since died. Jim was a master furniture maker, and the altar is made out of old growth redwood that was pulled out of the banks of the Sacramento River because, back in the day when they were doing all that old growth redwood logging, they would just, I guess, push the logs down the hill onto the riverbank, and then they would, float them down the river. So a lot of the logs just got pushed into the mud. And so there's a lot of this old growth redwood that got cut down. And so I guess they're reclaiming it out of the riverbank. And that's what Jim had. What he got was this old growth redwood. And so that's what our altar is made out of. So yeah, that has a nice history to it. And he was, as our Dharma brother, he was like, yeah, you need an altar. Let me make you guys an altar. So that was really great.
That's an amazing amount of history, nature, and kind of like that flow element too that comes into it. And then there it is. It looks like a very beautifully designed, not necessarily polished, but it's like for sure like a smooth, beautiful, kind of ornate,
Yeah.
simple surface.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the well, also just on the woodworking note, I think I saw on the Ocean Gate Zen Center's Instagram that you recently had lecterns made by
Right.
by a Sangha member as well.
Yeah.
It's cool that there are so many Sangha members that can offer their expertise in that way.
Well, Ron Day made the lecterns. His wife, Sandy Musashi, is a has been studying Ikebana for 30 years. So she does flower arranging at the Zen Center. And then Ron, who's not really a member of the center, I would say, not like he's not there sitting zazen, going to talks and things like that, but he's a master a furniture maker. And so we asked him if he could make these lecterns for us, and he said yes. And so he made them out of hardwood that he had lying around the shop. So that was cool. Yeah,
And those are beautiful pieces as well. And it's just great to have that kind of support where you have someone that can do the flower arranging, and some of these people that might be longtime Sangha members or otherwise more satellite people that will make a lasting impact on the center. I mean, they will have their lecterns will be used. It's really amazing. And then on the Heart Sutra note, I in anticipation of our conversation, I watched your Dharma talk on the Heart Sutra. I think it was maybe a couple months ago.
copying the Heart Sutra.
Yeah, copying the
Yeah.
Heart Sutra. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it a great deal. And it actually rekindled, I think it rekindled a practice for me, which was that a couple years ago I had started writing, copying the Heart Sutra in English in a notebook and just trying to do that on a regular basis. It fell off for various reasons, but after watching it last night, I decided to pick it back up again, and I wrote it myself. And you just kind of made it feel very approachable, but also meaningful, and kind of like, forget my Dharma talk, forget what everything I just said, just go and participate in it. And it's it's a really funny way to end a Dharma talk, but it did feel, it felt just that much more light. So how would you describe your experience with copying the sutra, and your interactions with it in its own, as a sutra?
Well, I think that, yeah, I talked about this as I recall in my talk. It's been a few weeks, so I kind of forgot what I said. But, copying the sutra, a lot of people have a hard time. I think, well, I think right now, because of all the politics that are going on, people are really struggling with too much news, not enough news, too much agitation, what to do with their minds, not to spin out on, what may or may not be happening. So I think that having some kind of activity where you just sit down and do it, and it's really popular, I guess, the last 10 or 15 or 20 years to do these kind of coloring in mandalas and things like that. But the thing about copying the Heart Sutra is that, it has a 1,000-year history of people doing this. And you can start out by lighting incense and, doing some bows, just standing bows. And then you can recite the Heart Sutra out loud in English or in Japanese. And we have, so there's the Soto Shu, the Japanese school in Japan of Soto Zen. And they have a website, I think it's called sotozen.net. And you can go on there and you can buy these little kits that are, very official, but you don't have to do official. You can just go get some tracing paper and, a copy of the Heart Sutra and maybe blow it up a little bigger so you can see it. And then you just sit there and really just pay attention to copying the sutra. And I'm sure the Heart Sutra is this kind of primary sutra in, I would say, in Mahayana Zen. It's Mahayana Buddhism. It's being used by many schools as a kind of core text. So I think there's this magic in the message, if you will, that you don't have to think about. It's like just copying and paying attention to what you're doing really grounds you in the present moment. It's a kind of meditation. And then in the midst of that, something, I don't know, like magic maybe, happens where it's coming into your eyes and your ears and your hands and into your heart. And then you can just settle into that. And then when you get done with it, at the bottom, what we do is we write some kind of wish, like you could write something like, I wish I had a Mercedes, but it may be better to write something like, I hope that all beings are happy, something along that line. And then you say humbly, because you want to present this in a humble way. Humbly, then you put your name. And then you take the copy and you put it on an altar or something like that, some kind of special place where you can leave it and let it kind of emit the energy of the effort that was put into that and the efficaciousness of it. Oh, and you can also incense it before you do that, before you put it on an altar, let's say. So I think that right now this is a good practice for a lot of us. But I think some people, meditation is hard for people in some ways because you sit down and meditate. I can't, at least 2 or 3 times since I've become a teacher, somebody will come up to me who's come to the Zen Center 1 or 2 times. They'll come up to me in the supermarket or up to my partner in the supermarket and they'll say, "Oh, I haven't been back to the Zen Center, because I can't meditate. I think too much." Well, it's like we all think. And Ujjayi Moroshi says thoughts are like mind secretions, right? So you just ignore them. Or you know, as Suzuki Roshi said, don't invite your thoughts to tea. So that's all we're doing. And I think when you copy a sutra, then you're more able to do that. You're more able to sit down and just really pay attention to making these strokes with a pen. You can use just a regular ballpoint pen. It doesn't have to be, like fancy brush strokes or something like that. Just write it out and pay attention to that. And then you don't have to get caught up in some ideas you have about what you think you're supposed to be doing. Because I think in meditation, that's a problem. In Shikantaza, just sitting, we're just sitting there, really just being present for the moment as it's arising. And, we want to have good postures so that we are actually attentive, and also because it allows a kind of energy flow through your body. But it's not exactly, it's not a woo-woo thing, you know? So it's just being present for your life as it's unfolding in the room where you are sitting zazen, listening with your ear. My teacher, Sojun Weitsman, told me that one time that he listens when he's sitting zazen, but you don't have like this heavy duty concentration object. So I think that sutra copying is this kind of unscary way to enter into that kind of grounding space of your life without having to make it into some kind of big deal.
Certainly, and especially when you are you're interacting with something powerful that is a powerful beyond an intellectual comprehension necessarily, like in its fullness. And I want to kind of get into that with you in a minute, but there is something about the exercise of training your hand, not necessarily digitally, unless digital is the only way that someone can do it, but to be able to handwrite something, or participate in other ways, whether it's bowing or chanting, or in other ways that are um, uh, deeply personal and physical, and allowing your body giving your body some of that priority. Because like I think like in America, and maybe in Western cultures, or maybe it's a global phenomenon, but intellectualization and a great deal of headiness is about, at least in my mind. And sometimes I get into over analysis, sometimes I get into, well, I want to understand this so I can communicate to someone else. And I feel like there are practices like the ones that we're talking about, with the heart, copying this Heart Sutra, or bowing, or doing some chanting, or even zazen. Some of these experiences are not necessarily communicable uh, in an intellectual way, or they're not necessarily intellectual exercises. What do you think is important for someone that is an overthinker to consider, or to try to um, uh, help them release some of that overactivity, or like release some of that desire to get an A, on this, and be able to share it with their friends accurately? Like what would you say to someone to help loosen that, and be more full in their experience?
Well, I think, in the case of, say, for example, meditation, one of the things is that we kind of pound away at, I think in general, is to not overthink it. So you have to put yourself in a situation where you might overthink it, and then let go of overthinking it. And since you're overthinking it, it's going to be hard to let go of overthinking it. So there's this way in which you can keep doing it until you get so tired in a way that you can't overthink it anymore, and you're just willing to sit there. And I think that's the value of doing long sittings, is to go and do shishin. That's one of the values of doing, say, a 5-day sitting or whatever. And is that you just kind of wear all of that out, and you eventually just sit there uh, because you've thought of everything that you can possibly think of. And you've just been doing this for hours, and there's nothing left. Um, so that's one approach to doing that. I think also doing things like sutra copying, where you are putting your mind just into the activity of the physicality of doing something, from a Zen perspective. I think going to a Zen center and doing group chanting, I think, is helpful in that regard. I think that many, there's this way in which in Soto Zen, we, we have kind of, I talked about this last week in my talk class Saturday, which was just a couple of days ago, is that in Soto Zen, we do meditation, we do work practice, we do ceremony, and we do study. And all of those activities are activities that Soto Zen is kind of unrelentingly relational. So we're doing these activities that you can get really heady about all of this stuff. You can get really heady about ceremonies, for example. And during the question and answer, one of my students said, well, why? Why do you do this thing this certain way? We're talking about why don't you light the incense using the candle that's on the altar instead of having a separate candle? And so, I told her why I thought that was. But I said, it's like as Americans, we're like, oh, why? And we want to know why before we do something. But in Zen, it's like, just do it. Just do this thing. So I think when you you need to find a teacher in a place where you feel like, everything is ethical and morally upright, and the Sangha members seem like good people and good Dharma friends and that kind of thing. And once you decide that you're going to do that, then you have to stick with it, because you're going to have thoughts and things of like, I don't like this. Why am I doing this? I don't like to stand around in shashu while I'm waiting for something. Like, what's that about? Am I in the army? What's the deal here? But if you just actually just stand in shashu when you're supposed to stand in shashu, and you gasho and you're supposed to gasho, and you can, eventually you just let go of that stuff and stop thinking about the why of it. And you can ask why. And as a teacher, I like to tell people why if I know the why, because I realize that they want why. But, Zen has this sort of a reputation ethos, and many teachers are like this. Would you just say, well, no, I'm not going to tell you why, just do it, right? Just do it. But my experience is that some people need the why, because otherwise they'll leave. So you kind of want to give them the why as a carrot. And so, the there is a why for a lot of this stuff, but to know it initially, the why isn't necessarily necessary. So I think, yeah, if we're really, I'm a heady person. I've written a couple books and they're fairly intellectual. And so, I'm like that too. And but there's this other side that you just have to say, okay, I'm just gonna let go of that and just be here. Just, like Baba Ram Dass, right? Be here now.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And
And it's hard. It's hard to do it. It's hard.
yeah, it's easy to say. It's easy.
Yeah,
It's just
easy to
just a
say,
couple.
hard to do.
Yes, no, certainly is. And thank you for kind of going into that too, because it really is with what you were saying, it really has settled more in my mind about how much of a leap it can be for some people to go into a setting that is new for them, whether it's Zen or maybe some other manifestation of Buddhism, and they'll walk in and they'll want to pick apart and not pick apart necessarily in a bad way, but just kind of like so they can take it, look at it, understand it, and then move on and like know exactly what they're getting into. But there is this very important kind of leap quality to it as well, where it's like, well, just do the service. And then if you have questions later, maybe you can talk to the sensei or you can talk
Yeah.
to somebody later. But do the service. If it's uncomfortable, obviously, or if you don't feel like you're in safe and trusting hands, then by all means, do what you need to do. But there is that leap element. Should you feel comfortable enough, maybe take that leap and see how that feels. Because I know that when I've walked that leap, it is it can be very gratifying in ways that you just can't really communicate to somebody else. It's a very personal experience. Well, and then on that note, Friendly, for you, as you were, moving into your committed life into Zen, had Zen been, or had Buddhism been a part of your life for a long time, or when did you find Buddhism?
Well, that's a really good question. So I'm almost 75. So I was in my 20s back in the 70s. And so that was a time of Baba Ram Das and the kind of hippie stuff and, dropping acid and smoking a lot of dope and doing all these things. And there were all these books out there. This guy, I think it was Baba G, I can't remember, there's a person who started a Zen center here in Santa Cruz, not a Zen center, a Hindu, like Mount Madonna. I can't remember his name right now, but he had this little book called the Yellow Book and this little slip book, and he never talked. So he wrote out these things. Anyway, there's just a lot of this stuff around. And so I got really engaged in that privately. I did things by myself. And I used to sit around, I would meditate for hours at a time. And I had this friend and I used to get really angry driving. And I had this friend who said, well, you spend all this time meditating and you're angry all the time. Like, but that's not very spiritual. What's that about? And I thought to myself, well, she's right. And so I just quit doing any of that kind of spiritual stuff. And since I'm a lesbian, I got involved in the lesbian community and played softball and ran around and did soccer and did all this stuff and just kind of went to bars and drank and forgot about all this stuff, right? And then at some point in my 30s, I had moved to San Francisco and I got interested. I had read, when I was living in Texas, I had read Ed Brown's book, Tassajara Cooking. And there was something about Tassajara cooking that really spoke to me, the little pictures, and maybe it's a Tassajara bread book. I think that was the first one, how to make bread and do all this stuff. And they had little pictures of Tassajara and all this. And when I got to San Francisco, I thought, well, maybe I'll go check out San Francisco Zen Center. Now, before that, I'd gone to a Tibetan center that was across the street. And the Tibetans were really nice. And they made a lot of noise when they sat zazen. People would be with like jangly bracelets on and stuff like that. Now, those were the lay people who were coming. I'm sure that wasn't the kind of career Zen career Tibetan practitioners. Anyway, I remember thought, oh, these people are so noisy and it's blah, blah, blah. And it's all very colorful and all this stuff. So I went over to San Francisco Zen Center across the street. Everybody wore black. Everybody was like doing this, and I thought, oh, this is my home. And so I started out going to morning zazen, which is in the basement of City Center. And I remember the first time I went to service, I had a friend of mine who was also going at the same time. And she and I were standing out on the sidewalk of the front of City Center after zazen. And we were saying to each other, oh, I'm really frightened to go to service. I really am afraid because everybody does all this stuff and they turn at the same time and they bow at the same time. And it's really scary. What if I do something wrong? And then what will happen? Something terrible might happen. And so we said, well, okay, we'll go, we'll support each other. And if something terrible happens, we'll support each other and be comrades in this new thing that we're going to do. So we went to service and I liked it. And so I was really hooked. And after that, I just really dove in and I went to zazen every day in service and would eat breakfast there and then go to work and then come back in the afternoon and go to service go to zazen at 5:30 in the afternoon and listen to the talks on Wednesday nights and all that. And then after about a year, I moved into San Francisco Zen Center as a resident. And by then I was pretty sure I wanted to get ordained. So it took about a couple of years later, I got ordained. And then I went to Tassajara for 4 years with my partner. And Jaku and I were there for about 4 years. She had gone the practice period before me. And then, and then things just went on from there. So I think, it's really scary. At least I find it really scary to do something new like that. It's, especially Zen, it's like people you don't know. Everybody seems to be at that time at San Francisco Zen Center, everybody was seemed like they were all in lockstep. Everybody was wearing robes. It was kind of formidable and scary, but I really wanted to jump into it. And I had some attachment to wanting to be perfect, wanting to be, and so that made it harder. I think that's the thing is you have to be willing to say, I don't know what in the world's going on here. I'm just going to throw myself into this. And if I make a fool out of myself, it's like I make a fool out of myself and it's okay. But it's really, really hard to do that. And especially when you first start out. So, people were essentially very kind, and it didn't take very long for me to figure out what was going on. But, I had a lot of adventure stories about messing up stuff and doing things wrong, and I'm here, you know. I mean, it feels like you're jumping out of an airplane and the parachute doesn't open, but it's not that bad. It's just not a life-threatening experience.
No, I feel like there is a lot of like seriousness and like the black robes and the silence and the order and everything like that. And then when you get into ritual implementation, especially with musically, there is a rhythm that you have to match, and the chanting you have to. It feels odd when you aren't familiar with the chants or the program necessarily, and so I could see that kind of intimidation being something that would maybe make someone not return or not go in the first place or whatever it is. Uh, I actually I sat a morning service at San Francisco Zen Center maybe mid-year last year, and it was my first time going there. It was they were under construction, so they were in the conference room, the
Uh-huh.
the morning services.
Next door.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I went in, and it started at 6:30. I got there at like 6:28, and took my shoes off, and already someone there were like these like more maybe shorter wood sticks that they were already starting to clank together, and I was like, oh man, I'm not starting this well. And but I got to the mat, and people were kind of helping me find my space. I did I had practiced zazen before in other temple settings, but so I wasn't totally out. But it was a different kind of circumstance, a lot more people, a lot more uh energy behind it. And then people were just like graciously passing me the chant book, or just like making sure that I was like in the right spot at the right time and helping me maneuver out. And then we all had to like move the cushions later on to set up for another meeting or things like that. So there was this like casualness that belied the the seriousness. And
That's
so
great.
yeah, and uh but I know what you mean. Like so like there you are like sitting down, you're drawn to Zen Center because of the meditation and the black robes. There's like the simpleness to it, but there's also the severity. But then you look at, a lot of people find that they're drawn to Zen. Um, some people have been drawn to Zen because of the back of Suzuki Roshi's book, where you just see his face, this just very energetic face, and it's a very pleasant like countenance. And so how does that work? Like how does this very severe kind of strict uh robe wearing black kind of aesthetic match this kind of warm, casual kind of feeling, inviting feeling? It's this kind of like before we spoke, I never really thought about it as being this kind of woven complicated mixture of what Zen can be here.
Well,
Mhm.
first of all, let me just say I'm really glad to hear that San Francisco Zen Center is so welcoming. I went in, I started out in 1986, and people were much more uptight. So I'm very glad to hear that I left San Francisco Zen Center I think in 2007. So it's been quite a while since I lived there and been a resident. So that's really great, because I don't want people to think by listening to this the San Francisco Zen Center is a scary place, because I don't think it is. Not these days, you know. And so I'm really glad to hear that. And we try to also do that at Ocean Gate, to be welcoming and to say to people, if you make mistakes, it's fine. It's like, how would you know this? How would you know how to do this the first time you've ever walked in? The function of the forms and the function of that formality is, at least this is what I think, is that um, what is it we're trying to do by practicing? I think what we're trying to do in Mahayana Buddhism is we are trying to become more skillful, more compassionate. And the skillfulness and compassion comes out of the, technical wisdom, which is, things are without inherent existence. So if things are without inherent existence, it means that things are interconnected. That's compassion, right? Compassion is feeling with someone else or some other being or the environment or however we're going to talk about that. So what's the end game of this? The end game of this is how do we support each other? How do we, live together with each other in a way that is sane? And how do we, it doesn't mean that we're all standing around singing Kumbaya with each other. How does that happen? So if we go to service, and service is this chanting service is this very tight, if you will, interconnected event of all the participants. So if you're in the assembly, which is the group of people who are not have some official role, but you're chanting and you're reading, the chants. If you're the doshi, who's the person who's the officiant, if you're the doan, who's the person who's hitting the bells, or the kokyo, the person who's announcing the chants, all of us are codependent with each other. We're all doing this thing together. The doshi's paying attention to what the doan's doing and the bells that are hitting to know, oh, that's as if I'm doshi, that's my signal to gasho and walk up to the altar. And then to offer incense. And then since the doan's not going to know exactly how long it takes me to offer incense, they have to watch me. When I bow, they hit the bell. So the first bell was my cue to go up, and the second bell was they took their cue from me. So it's like, it's very interconnected. Or when you're chanting with each other, you're chanting, we say, chant with your ears. So you're listening to the person next to you. You're trying to keep up with, you're not you in the assembly. It's kind of none of your business to overlay on top of that your ideas about how it should be, which, believe me, we all get after you've done it for a while. Your thing is to you do it as a member of the group. The person who's keeping time, their job is to push the chant slightly, but follow the chant at the same time. So it's like everybody's got this thing that they're doing, but the totality of all of that becomes a living version of how do we work with each other? How are we skillful with each other? How do we learn to be in harmony with each other? And so it's kind of like this dance that we're doing. And so the formality of Zen is that dance. The formality of the Zen is we're not doing a waltz. We're doing, contra dancing. So, we're doing this particular thing. And by doing this particular thing together and learning all these different parts and how to do those things together, it becomes part of our body, right? And so we start to learn how to be with each other in a way that is not specifically said, okay, you're doing this because you're going to be, in harmony with each other, and that's going to teach you something. You just do this thing. And you learn through years and years of doing it, how to do it. And I think this practice, the Zazen and the ceremony and the working together and studying together and all of these things, I think that it starts to shape how you think about the world. It starts to transform how you are with each other. And the hard part, of course, well, there's two hard parts. One is the hard part about what you're bringing to it that creates conflict for yourself. Like, I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this? That kind of stuff that we do. Or my idea about, man, I'm so great. I know how to do this. I am so good at this. Or, oh, I'm so bad at this. I'm so terrible. I can't ever do this again. Look at me, I messed up again. It's like whatever it is that we're bringing to this party that is not particularly helpful. And then there's the interacting with the Sangha, which is, I don't like that person next to me. Oh, look at the other person. Aren't they so great? It's like, I can't believe I have to actually wash dishes with this person that I don't like, that kind of stuff. And so how do we practice with each other? How do we realize that, oh, that person that isn't like me, or maybe I don't like that kind of person, I start to see the wisdom of that person. Like, I get less judgmental about, oh, that person is always so bubbly and happy, and I don't like those kind of people. Or that person is always a downer. I don't like that kind of person. And as you have to work and be with that person and harmonize with that person, you start going, oh, okay, I get it. This kind of person in the world is important. And that kind of person in the world is important. And so I can't like push away because I don't happen to like that kind of person, or I don't happen to like that person. Because of course, the more we get to know that person, we discover, oh, they're much more like us than not like us. right? Because in Zen, and in Buddhism, we have this doctrine that everything is interdependent, codependent, arising, functioning together. And so therefore we are the same. So little lecture there, sorry.
It
But
was
that,
wonderful.
but that's like how I think that's what's going on in our formal practice. And hopefully that rubs off and then becomes part of our life, right? That's how and then when things don't work, we fall back on the practice. We have, we take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and we say, why didn't that work? What did I do? Is that me? Is it them? Is it, the circumstances? How can I bring my practice to this and figure out how to make this work better? Or how do I change my mind about this? Or what teachings are there? That kind of stuff.
Certainly. And thank you for going into that, because there is this ideal that I think that people kind of go into. I share that perfectionism route where, you want to make sure that you're doing it to the T, and because that feels like the more authentic version of what is expected of you or what you expect of yourself. And you want to not maybe this would be me personally, but you don't like want to stick your neck out for being out of line or whatever it is. But um when you have that kind of pressure, there's also this, even if you don't have that perfectionism, you can like look around your uh fellow the assembly and the people to the left and to the right of you, and you can have critiques on their personalities, or you can not want to have their business rubbing off on you, or like that kind of souring the practice. And I really do appreciate how you kind of emphasize that interconnectedness and that necessary element of community that's a part of that, and like that diversity that is humanity, and that all being practice in its own right. But there's this, uh, I'm curious to go into this just briefly, which is that when you see a fellow assembly person and they're for whatever reason bugging you, whether it's personality or the noise they're making or whatever it is, I can sometimes think of it like, oh, okay, great, this is a learning moment for me. Like, can I handle this? Can I allow space for this? Can I remember a time when I was annoying? Or can I remember a time when I made weird noises or whatever it is? My stomach was growling. That must have been very upsetting for them the other time. So can I do that? And then, just to kind of suss this out, but like, is it weird to then be using that experience and that person as a means to my own awakening or my own learning? Like, does it kind of feel like there's a sense of like objectification in a way, where you are like, all right, well now, Henry, I'm going to be associating you with my learning right now. So you as a person, I'm going to use your flaws to feed my enlightenment here, or my deepening of practice. You are annoying, Henry, but I will be using you now. I'm just like curious about like that kind of like relationship with the
Well,
Sangha.
first of all, it's like, if you're saying you are annoying and I'm going to use you, then you're off in left field right then and there. Just the language of that is like problematic. Um, don't we all use each other? I mean, isn't that how we learn how to practice? It's like being kids, right? How do we learn to socialize as kids? We go to school together, and unfortunately, as children, we're usually not very nice to each other. And so, we all kind of we do, what the Japanese call potato practice. And, it's like where you take a bunch of potatoes and you put them in a pot together, or a thing of water, and knock all the eyes off, and clean it by knocking them against each other. So there's that kind of practice. And that's can be really kind of brutal and not particularly helpful. Um, I think that, well, I think that we do we do we how do I say this? We do use each other in that way. Um, on the other hand, what other things do we have to work with? It's like a pearl. How does a pearl get made? It gets made because there's a piece of sand in the shell, and then that irritant builds a pearl. And Suzuki Roshi says, and he's not the only one, but the teaching that we have to have problems. If we don't have problems, well, we're not living in this world. we're not human beings living in the subtle world. Um, so of course they become uh, ruefully sometimes opportunities to practice. And that's when we have to do the work of not objectifying that person, but looking at ourselves and saying, um, this person is annoying to me. And in what you said, you also talked about the way that we practice, which is this person's annoying to me. What do I do? Right? What do I do that's annoying to other people? And that we build compassion for each other by saying, yeah, okay, that person's doing that, but what it is that I do, which makes us humble. And when we become humble like that, we become more open to being less judgmental about that other person. The Tibetans are great because they have these actually techniques for, how you do this. Like you would say, use that practice just like that to say, well, what do I do that's like that? Or to, let me see if I can think of something else. Um, to remember that that somebody has the causes and conditions of their life that brings them to this point, and to feel compassion towards the causes and conditions of their life. And then what are my causes and conditions? And then these two causes and conditions kind of, as we say in psychology, hook with each other, or that they come clashing together. So how do I create spaciousness and more generosity by allowing and acknowledging that this person has their own set of causes and conditions? And you have to be careful about making up the story of what that is, because you don't know what the story is. But to acknowledge that, yeah, this person has their own life and their own traumas and the things that have happened to them, and that we become more generous and open and spacious for that. So there are these ways that we can practice with this stuff.
And thank you for offering that that last touch, especially where it's like you just can't assume a whole lot. It's not helpful to build a story because you I think that with a lot of work you can maybe get a grasp of your own story, but you really have to really show up for yourself to be able to even tie that one
Yeah.
together. So to assume it for someone else is
Well, I want to tell you a little story about
please.
when I first started practicing at City Center back in the late 80s. They had radiators in the ceiling in the Zendo, because it was originally like when they built the building, it was a kind of a concert hall or something. They had like a stage. And anyway, they had these radiators in the ceiling, and there was a sitting that was happening, and there was this clicking sound that happened throughout the sitting. And I thought it was the radiators. So because it was the radiators, I just accepted the fact that there was this clicking noise happening, and that was just what it was, and I didn't think much about it. When I got upstairs to the small kitchen after the sitting was over, which I don't know if it's still there now because I haven't been there since the remodeling, but there was a little kitchen off the main kitchen, and everybody was complaining about this sound because it was some person who was in the Zendo, and they were making a clicking sound in the back of their throat. I guess they had postnasal drip or something. Everybody was unhappy. They wanted to kill this person, I mean, not literally, but just they were so unhappy about it. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. I didn't know it was a person. So it didn't bother me. I thought it was something I couldn't stop, had no control over. It was just, a mechanical thing that was going on. But for these other folks who were sitting close enough to know that this was a person doing this, they were angry because they felt like this person should have stopped. Like this person was being, selfish, and that they didn't realize that they were upsetting everybody around them and all this kind of stuff. And so everybody was pissed at this guy. But I thought, well, this is really interesting, because if they just related to this person, this noise, as if it were something that nobody had any control over, it was just a happening thing, nobody would have been upset. So it's so interesting how our minds work. If we think that somebody else is doing something that they should fix it because they're annoying me. Why are they doing this to me? Right? It's like, it's this whole thing that we get going. And so, yeah, it's really important and that, that's a series of causes and conditions that he came to the sitting, he was having postnasal drip, I guess, and he was making that noise and whatever. And it's like, they had their causes and conditions, which is why would this person do this thing to me, right? And I had my causes and conditions, which were I just happened to not think that that was what was going on, and so I didn't get upset about it. Maybe if I'd known, I would have been upset. I don't know, but anyway, it's so interesting, how this stuff plays out.
Certainly. Yeah, and then also too, and there's the exercise of like, have I been sick, or like, is can this like awaken like some sort of like even the compassion for that person who's like still showing up for practice, but like,
Yeah,
is needs to take care. Um, but yeah, like this, like you're in the same room, hearing the same sound, but just because of where you are in proximity to the nasal drip person, that is uh P post nasal drip PND at P. You're thinking it's a radiator. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, so it's like so sometimes like I'll hear especially in the spring birds making nests in the temple ceiling or something like that, or like the roof under the roof, and that doesn't bother me a bit. But because there's what I can't tell a white crowned swallow to knock it off. I can't do that, or a
right.
sparrow. But with a person, you can be like, "Hey, Henry, like chill out. Like, what are you doing to me?" Whereas
Yeah,
this sparrows don't know that they're doing anything to anybody. They're
yeah,
just they're sparrowing.
yeah,
And then well, on the compassion note, just because I was looking through the Ocean Gate Zen Center's website, and this kind of ties it a little bit into our conversation about chanting earlier. There's a chant that you include in the drop down of the chant book that's available, which is such a great resource. So thank you for making that available to everyone. There is a chant that is the Enmei Juku Kanon Gyo,
yeah.
and I'm not too familiar with that one. I've read up a little bit about it, but I just wanted to see if you have a personal connection with that, or if there's something that you like to share when you're sharing that with your sangha.
Well, it's just I shouldn't say just, but it's a part of the normal Soto Zen liturgy, and it's Nanmeju Kanago is for bringing efficacious results. Dharanis are uh, like kind of untranslatable things. Although we did translate it because I found it online, and so we do part of it in English, which I'm embarrassed to say that off the top of my head I can't remember what it is. Um, so, but the idea is that it's you're when we chant that we're chanting it for to like if somebody's sick, you would chant the Imijuku Kanago to hopefully help them heal in some way. Or if somebody has died, you might chant the Imijuku Kanago for their passage, something like that. So it's a short chant, and that's the idea. And you might chant it 7 times or 3 times, or you might sometimes people chant it and they'll speed up really fast. They'll start slow and then speed it up and do it like 7, 14, 21 times, some kind of increments of 7, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a magical incantation kind of thing.
Mm-mm-mm. And I feel like also too, there's a with Guanyin elsewhere in the world, there is an association with like a coastal seafaring reliance on that figure. And I was just curious if there's something with Ocean Gate being 10 minutes away from the beach, if there's like something that's like with the ocean and Kanon, or and having that all kind of being together. I don't know if there's like a direct association with that, but it sounds like this is part of
Uh,
the Soto Zen liturgy.
yeah, and the answer to your question is no. I'd never thought of that, but hey,
There you
that's a great idea.
go. Cool. There you go.
Oh yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah, I like that because Dogen, when he was coming back from China, there was supposed to have been this huge uh, storm that came up, and then Kenon appeared on a leaf next to the ship, and then the storm died down, and they were safe. So, hey, there you go.
There you go. Perfect. And then on a translation note, or like also things that are chanted, the Genjokoan, you have a book coming out in August.
I
Uh,
do. Yeah.
yeah, well, congratulations. And that is called Meeting the Myriad Things, a Zen Practitioner's Guide to Dogen's Genjokoan. And that is looks like it's available all over the place, but it's coming out August 19th, 2025.
Yeah.
Oh, really exciting. So how was the writing of this book? How did that go for you? Did it deepen anything
Well,
for you? Hmm.
yeah, it started out, I was teaching a class on Genjokoan, so I wrote the book from my notes, but the, but, you know, of course it was a learning experience because it always is. And also I try to, um, go back and look at other things that Dogen said about whatever it is. So, you know, I'm also continuing to learn as best I can what Dogen was trying to teach us about the Dharma. Genjokoan is interesting because he wrote it very early on in his career coming back from China. And it may have been the impetus for writing it might have been conversations that he had with maybe a guy who was like a crew member on the boat that he had coming back from China. They're not quite sure who this person was, that they have a name. I can't remember the guy's name, but he wrote it for a particular person. But he kept editing it through the rest of his life. And it's a really interesting text because I think it's a guide to how to become awakened. He's really laying out for us his ideas about what it is to do the Bodhisattva practice. And the ending of it is Master Baoshe waving his fan, um, and talking about the nature of reality. And I think that story at the very end encapsulates everything that Dogen's been trying to teach up to this point. So I talk about that in the book. Um, my books are a kind of combination of, I really try to go into my source material, and I read scholarly texts as well as practice texts about like a text, let's say like Genjokoan, so that people can get a background about what the Japanese is. And I do not read Japanese, but I have friends who are fluent in Japanese who are Buddhist practitioners and stuff, which helps. Otherwise, I couldn't do that part of it. But to talk about the Japanese, talk about what the uh, various possibilities are of something, or where a passage came from, or what the background is on it, and also the practice of what this is in everyday life. Like I'll talk about driving your car, going to the grocery store, or something like that, because uh, I think as practitioners, first of all, Dogen's hard to understand, and so it's good to get the lay of the land of what he's saying so that we understand that. But then how do we enact that in our everyday life? Because that's where we're practicing. We're not practicing in a 13th century monastery up in the mountains of Japan. And he was writing for human beings who were practicing. Therefore, all of that, I think, is transferable to our current life. In this particular book, for the more geeky of us, there is a translation of a commentary that two of Dogen's students, Sene and Kyogo, did of their commentary of the Genjokoan that Shohaku Okumura translated back in the 90s. And I asked Shohaku if I could publish this. And he said, yeah, you can, I'm happy to have you publish it, but it needs to be edited. And for me, it was like, what could I possibly do except maybe fix the tenses or something in his English? So Zuiko Redding, who died last April, Zuiko had been studying medieval Japanese for quite a while, and she was a Dharma colleague of mine, and also knew Shohaku. And so Zuiko did the editing for this and wrote an introduction to it. It's one of the appendix in the book. And so this commentary is really interesting because their commentary is kind of the foundation for almost every translated commentary that we have on the Genjo Koan from Japanese teachers. You can just see where they got what they were talking about. So I'm really glad that Shambhala was willing to publish that as part of my commentary. So, and I refer to it, the parts that I think are obscure or difficult, I'll talk about in my commentary about what I think that Sen and Kyogo meant in their commentary. So anyway, it's kind of like a layer cake of, you know, my various aims in this book was to be able to, I always want to be able to talk about Dogen in a way that's accessible to us as modern human beings and practitioners about how it actually looks in our daily life. But I also feel like it's really important that we study Dogen and understand what Dogen was trying to say. Because if we're just kind of winging it or making it into something we already know, then we're going to miss his point. And sometimes we can't understand that unless we uh, read translations with footnotes, you know, or read a scholarly article about what scholars think it means, something like that, or have teachers who do that, so that we know that we're in the ballpark of what it is that Dogen was actually talking about. So yeah, so that's kind of what, you know, that's pretty much my aim in doing these commentaries. And
Yeah.
you know, doing a commentary, it's a conversation that we're all having about the teachings. And some of us have the conversation by writing a book, but we also just have the conversations by doing podcasts and talking to each other or just having a beer, you know, and talking about Dogen or whatever. And so it's, you know, it's just this one big conversation that we're all having, you know, with different access points.
Yeah, and you could also have like an access point. What it seems like from our conversation, even with like zazen or like with chanting or bowing, it's like you can have these
Yeah.
things that aren't necessarily intellectual, but you can have the feeling that of what Dogen was trying to go for, or in fact did go for, or you know, however it's embodied for you. And thank you for making something like this accessible, but also accessible to the point where should it inspire you, you can go deeper and you can go for like a more research-based academic avenue. There's like an academic avenue for you to kind of go deeper on this and to kind of see where you can then your inspiration can then veer off into and spoke out into a deeper fields with Dogen, with Soto Zen, medieval Japan, all of that. So thank you for making that available. And then additionally, I just want to bring it up. You have other books, Being Time, A Practitioner's Guide to Dogen's Shobogenzo Uji, and you're also featured in uh, some of your work is featured in Receiving the Marrow, Teachings on Dogen by Soto Zen Women, Priests, and also The Hidden Lamp, 100 Koans and Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women. Um, so thank you for making your work available for people and for writing in a way for it to be uh, available in a way that things are accessible. I just had two quick questions. Maybe we already touched on one of them, but one would be: is there anything that you'd like to promote, if whether it's this book or something in addition to the book, Ocean Gate Zen Center and what they're up to, and also just in general some sort of cause or foundation? And then the second question is, uh, do you have any advice for anybody who is uh, on the Buddhist path that you would have wanted to have heard when you were walking it yourself?
Well, the first thing is I just want to thank everybody who came before me doing and all the scholars who've translated Dogen and done all of this incredible amount of work and all the people who've written commentaries and all of us who, you know, thinking about the Dharma and studying and all those things, because of course we stand on the shoulders of everybody who's done this work that's come before us or standing next to us or however you want to talk about that. So I want to thank all those people and yeah, promotion. Well, I don't know. You know, Ocean Gate Zen Center, where we are a temple in which we are making our best effort to offer the Dharma in a way that is transformative and also not scary. So, you know, everybody's welcome. Um, Jaku and I have been practicing for a long time. We're also affiliated with the Japanese. We're registered with the Japanese Soto Shu, and we're called Kokusaifukyoshi, which is international teachers. There are about 50 of us. So that's another aspect that we bring to our practice is the work and practice that we do with the Japanese Soto Shu. Um, yeah, you know, I just want to promote Buddhism in general. And, you know, I don't think that Buddhism has a corner on the market. I don't think that we're like we're better than some other religion or something like that. And I don't think religion is better than being agnostic or atheist or anything along those lines. I just, want to promote anything that we do that helps us to be more compassionate with each other and kind of has some wisdom and sanity in our relationships. Let's see, what was the last thing that?
Oh, like any advice for somebody that is walking the path that you would have wanted to have heard when you were walking it?
Oh gosh. Don't forget that you're dealing with other human beings, that your teachers are human beings. That doesn't mean that we should always respect our teachers, but we shouldn't leave our common sense uh, on the doorstep. Um, have fun. Don't be too uptight. Don't be too scared. Have fun and take it seriously at the same time. And throw yourself into the house of the Buddha, as Dogen likes to say. And really, if you want to do the practice, then just wholeheartedly do the practice for a while and ask questions. You should be able to ask questions. I have one student, she asks the best questions because she's very skeptical. Why? So ask questions. Yeah. And listen. Listen and see if you can find that harmony and space for yourself. And go to different places and find out what resonates for you. Maybe Catholicism is better for you than Buddhism. Maybe being Theravada Buddhism is better than Zen Buddhism or whatever it is, but go around and check out different places and see, maybe your heart's in Judaism or Islam or I don't know, being a theosophist or a Wicca. Anyway, whatever it is.
Certainly, especially these times too, just
Mhm.
recognizing each other's humanity is so important. So thank you for your encouragement to that. You make it seem like it's not just a necessary thing, but something that can be done with joy. So thank you very much. And
Yeah.
Reverend Shinshu, thank you so much for
Thank
speaking
you,
with me
Vincent.
today. This is such a wonderful conversation. And a really big time congratulations on your upcoming publication coming out in August. It's so exciting, and I look forward to reading it. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, and thank you for asking me.
Of course.
Thank you very much.